here we are on Easter Friday. Let's see if we can do a little bit of talking about NFTs since it's been super hyper popular, and obviously mostly from a decentralized gaming perspective, which we're not super well known for. I guess NFTs, and people maybe think that it doesn't work or can't work with decentralized games, but obviously we think that it can. And we obviously have some rather tough views, cynical views, shall we say, on NFTs in general. Easter egg NFTs, exactly. So I want to get some free flow conversation, but at the same time, I want to see if we can add just a little bit of structure and maybe, just how I've got some talking points here that you've seen before in the doc. But let me just kick off if we talk a little bit around history of NFTs, and obviously if we go off in tangent. That's all cool. We can always bring it back. But if we start it off, if we say people are talking about like art NFTs, whether it's JPEGs or videos, and we've seen Beeple selling his for 69 million. But kind of where did it come from? Why? And partly, we're going to be looking at why has it gone so crazy before we kind of bring it back to why is it useful in some way? So I don't know if someone wants to start us off where they think NFTs started. Now, obviously, this is like it has like a pre-blockchain history, right? So I don't know if someone's brave enough to kick us off and say where they think NFTs started.
I can try.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, it could be that it's before this as well, but from my own understanding, the first NFT was this blockchain Bitcoin domain on Namecoin. So on Namecoin you can store like human readable names which have to be absolutely unique, and the first one that was registered on there was d/Bitcoin, and the d/ was like a prefix to say that it was a domain. But potentially there could have been some other stuff done on maybe on Bitcoin itself. I'm not sure, but as far as I'm aware, that was probably that one in the blockchain space anyway.
Yeah, you probably spam as a link.
That is also my understanding. I mean, of course, you could say in the blockchain space there was not much before Namecoin except Bitcoin. Of course, on Bitcoin, every coin is in principle not fungible. So you could say, the Genesis block reward, or that is not spendable, but the reward of block 1 is kind of an NFT by itself, or like the very first blockchain thing. And I would imagine that it would be quite valuable if Satoshi were around to actually sell the private key to it to some collector or whatever. But of course that is just a technical thing, and the Namecoin names were, as far as I can tell, the first blockchain assets or tokens or whatever that were actually meant to be non-fungible in that sense.
Yeah, but in the obviously in the current sense of the word, they are like kind of different, where everybody's they are more for trading, aren't they? Whereas I guess with the Namecoin domains, they weren't, even though it was expected people would trade them, they were actually more for a usage and for utility, whereas now probably they have become collectibles themselves as well. And I'm sure there would be, somebody would pay quite a lot for that first Namecoin name if there was a marketplace for it, and if it was on OpenSea or something like that. Because at the moment, everybody seems to be going back to the first NFTs, or like CryptoPunks or whatever they think. They're the ones that have the massive value. So yeah, I think those Namecoin domains and names are probably on
you just have to wrap it
level now. Yeah, there is some discussion at the moment about creating a Namecoin marketplace specifically for doing these trades. It's something that Daniel worked on as well, for doing like atomic transactions for trading the names for Namecoin. So hopefully that will be coming in the not.
Well, I never really worked on it. There are of course ideas how to do it,
yeah.
And then there was someone from the Namecoin community who actually created a tool that was just a command line tool, I think, either. to kind of doing the RPC calls that set up the transaction, but still it was not easy to use. But yeah, it never really took off because also I think it was a bit ahead of its time. And as Andy said, Namecoin names were meant to be used. But then, at least at that time, the project never really took off, so there was no mainstream use for it. And I think like the mainstream people or the crypto mainstream people, in some sense, they only really got interested in NFTs with the collectible aspect of it, not the usage thing.
I'm just curious, has somebody done like an NFT of Genesis block or Bitcoin Genesis block or something, like block header or something? If somebody done it, like you could make anything out of it,
Yeah, of course.
Unique. And because that will sell a lot if somebody does that. But the problem is who gets to own that NFT? Because it's not like that's the thing that the weird thing about
obviously
blockchain,
Satoshi, right?
What?
Obviously Satoshi, right?
Yeah, Satoshi.
Yeah, no, but that's also weird because I think like in like transactions you have owners and stuff, but blocks nobody owns a block header really. Even miners don't own a block header. If somebody wants to tokenize a block, it's like a commons, like the air we breathe or something. But yeah, it would be nice. I guess somebody would do it.
I'm sure someone must have put in, say, like the headline from the newspaper. That must be in an NFT somewhere. Probably multiple NFTs. I know it's not quite the same thing, but it's inspired.
Is it the first person who mints it though, or is it the person who created it mints it that would make it valuable? Like if we just minted it the first time, it's not going to probably have any value. But if Satoshi minted it, or like if Elon Musk minted anything, it's going to be worth a fortune, isn't it?
You could argue that the Genesis block of Bitcoin, Satoshi basically NFTized the chancellor, that line from the newspaper. It's literally a forest block. It's also a kind of NFT of a real world object, right? So you could, it's a kind of a joke. You could say he started Bitcoin to make an NFT out of the chancellor headline.
And Bank of England is now an NFT.
Exactly.
It's called Bitcoin.
Exactly. That's the NFT.
But it also is not really a token in the sense that you typically think of, not even in the sense that Namecoin is, in that you can transfer it. It's more just the time. It's basically just a timestamp on blockchain. And I mean, even the white paper talks about timestamps. So this is a concept that goes back to the very beginning, and because it makes sense, of course.
Very true.
And NFTs, they have this timestamping aspect for me, kind of like if I'm an artist and I'm in the picture or whatever. And actually the hash or the IPFS link or whatever is included in the on-chain transaction, then I can also prove that I was the first to do that. And if someone just takes the file and mints it as well, then they will be later.
That makes sense. So let me bring in a topic here, which actually came from Killery. Unfortunately, he can't join us today, but I think quite rightly, we had a discussion in the Discord about pre-blockchain NFTs. So there's going to be a centralized database, but everyone is all feeding off the same source of truth, which is, it's not the same, but there's obviously something similar in spirit. Would you consider that an NFT? Would any of you consider that an NFT?
I guess a local one. Like, you play a role-playing game, you create this value for your local session. Like you can play several days, and I think until it's fully decentralized and it's only local, because it can't go through time for enough time to be considered something. I don't know. I don't like this NFT not NFT because I think it breaks it. But what I want to say is that it's different because it loses universality, kind of. I mean, non-fungible and fungible, I am more in my head is more about token or not. Obviously, token exists before blockchain. It's all about social consensus that existed. Like Daniel mentioned before, it's exactly that. Like, I think blockchain make it digital and easier to maintain, but it doesn't bring anything fundamentally new, actually.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, don't let me kill the conversation. Yeah, it's fun. I was watching a thing on YouTube about this, about fungibility and how some guy sees it as a spectrum. It was a fairly well reasoned explainer, and he was talking about NFTs and talking about fungibility in general in terms of, is money in terms of, gold being super fungible because at the atomic level it is basically all the same, and then you have, say, cash, which, yes, it might have, numbers on it, which makes it kind of non-fungible in one sense. One, note may be blacklisted because it's been in a robbery. But generally, we accept, that a $1 bill is the same as another $1 bill, or a $5 bill is as good as 5 single dollar bills, etc. So there's this, really high level of fungibility with those tokens. They're tokens, right? The pieces of paper, even though individually they could all be marked in such a way that they're all individual with their serial number, it doesn't really matter, right? Because we all know that $1 is $1, one Doge is one Doge. I don't know, my internet connection cut, or everyone's just nodding their heads.
No. Nodding.
I guess it's a context that makes them fungible or not fungible. Like you could keep the coin and wait 10,000 years, and then you will have something very special because most of the other are destroyed and you managed or lost, and you managed to keep it, making it really non-fungible. But in the current time, like everybody will accept it as a coin for its value.
So then a question there is Satoshi's other bitcoins that we all think that he might have, and if he were still alive, presupposing that it's half-inny, if he could trade his other bitcoins, would those other bitcoins be more valuable?
Initially, it would have some collector's value, right? Like the first Bitcoin ever mined.
Not just even the first one, but even just like any of them come from Satoshi. Like as a series of NFTs or whatever.
Yeah, I think there is. I think they are more valuable in usage, aren't they? Or did they change that, Daniel, where the transaction fees were less if you moved old coins?
That was a long time ago that they changed it. There was a system in place similar, I think, to some projects nowadays rediscover this. Basically, if you had built up coinage on your transaction, which is something that it's actually an interesting concept because it builds up at a finite rate. So it is kind of rate limited by itself. And if you then spend an old coin that destroys a lot of coinage, then you would get what was called priority. And that would allow you to get into like 10% of the blocks that were reserved for these. I mean, of course, this is just a minor policy, but the default client did that. But I think they scrapped that in 2014 or something like that.
Okay, some time ago.
But of course, what definitely is interesting to these fresh, even not just to Satoshi's coins. I mean, they have a collector's value, might have, but even to in general, freshly mined coins. And that has come up throughout the time is that they are fresh coins. They don't have a history, which means that they might be more valuable because they are not tainted on some blacklist of an exchange or whatever. I think in practice that's not really the case, but that has been come up in discussions over and over.
I think there's this, in some kind of economy, there's a notion that things have exchange value, like you get in exchange, and also it's a symbolic value. The kind of value that you have in something like, for example, you went on a trip and you got a mug. Exchange value might be just like $5 or $10, but because it's every trip, symbolic value is so much you don't want to sell it. You will hold that mug all your life, for example. So I guess, and symbolic value is an interesting thing in terms of social capital. So, for example, when you get Satoshi's coin, even though it might be a market price, which is exchange value, and whatever is 50,000 USD, but the symbolic value will be so high that it will build up your social capital, not your monetary capital. Like you could just show off, this is you see the UTL, so I'm the one, So I guess there is that, and that cannot be, of course, captured in terms of money, but it has a lot of value, right? So especially in a community kind of social aspect. It has a lot of that. Like that person might immediately
makes sense.
shoot up to like being a popular guy on Twitter because that guy just owned Satoshi's coin. With the same as everybody else, but he just got in on the first thing, But at the same time, if it's Satoshi and if it's like a public sale or something, you could still capitalize it by, auctioning or something because it might not be like a regular. So then the symbolic value becomes an exchange value. But it doesn't always have to be the same, So I guess NFTs make that thing quite interesting then. Finally, you have a symbolic value, although not just exchange value.
So kind of following on for that, so kind of NFTs can be defined in different ways, and obviously it doesn't even seem to be the same thing for everyone. Everyone has different perspectives of what is acceptable to them. So then a next obvious question, which kind of relates to history, is if Namecoin is an NFT, each of the tradable names, right? Let's accept that, at least for this conversation. One of the next most obvious NFTs that's mentioned in history is obviously Spells of Genesis. So it's obviously a game which was on Counterparty, I believe, from 2015. And then later on we had Ethereum came along, and we had some early attempts in Ethereum. We have people obviously talking about mooncats very recently and trying to rescue these mooncats. We have CryptoPunks, and I think there's even some other very early sort of games or art or whatever you want to call it in and around Ethereum. Now, obviously, all of that's before CryptoKitties, which has kind of been the elephant in the room. We haven't mentioned that yet. But each of these examples that I've given there, they all function in a slightly different way. They're on different blockchains. Obviously, Spells of Genesis is now moved. I think it's on multiple chains. But the overall idea is if we accept, that Namecoin has NFTs, which that's reasonable. But each of them are technically different. Each of them are different at a technical level. Whether you're using Ethereum or whether you're using, Counterparty or whether you're using Namecoin, we all have this idea of an NFT-ness, even if at a technical level they're different. And so, the question that I'm kind of trying to tease out here is, how much does it matter to have something like a standard? Now, obviously, there is importance in it, so I'm not saying that there isn't any, but how much do we get ourselves all tied up worrying about standards versus, having something which is a bit more open or a bit more, free or a bit more loosey-goosey, ill-defined, because at least we know what it is. Maybe there's different NFTs for different situations, or different technical implementations which are good for different situations. So let me kind of, that was a kind of a long-winded kind of ramble, but I think you kind of got what I was saying. I don't know if someone wants to jump in and put their opinion out of like how important is it to have like a really strict definition of an NFT in a technical way, or does it not matter because over history things have changed over time?
Yeah, so I think obviously standards are very important from a technical point of view. If you want to have like network effect, you want to have interoperability. For instance, on the Ethereum ecosystem, only when ERC 721 came up, and then you could have things like OpenSea that are a marketplace for basically all NFTs. And you have like people knowing that and people gathering there and just it building up network effect. That is tremendously valuable in the sense that, like we had this example with Namecoin, hardly anyone nowadays knows about Namecoin, and you cannot easily trade them. You can technically, but not just click somewhere and you buy it. And I think that is a big hindrance for Namecoins to be, collectibles, which they are not meant to be, but in that sense. Whereas whatever NFT, you can just follow the standard, and then all the applications work. You can just put it on the marketplace, and everyone is just able to buy it in the way they're used to it. That is an enormous value to it. But of course, that should not mean that other things are not NFTs. But I think from a more, obviously standards are important for these reasons that you get interoperability and network effects. But I don't think standards should be used to define what an NFT is, right? I think a lot of people coming from the Ethereum community and not being too deeply into the technicals. Maybe they kind of use ERC 721 or ERC 1155 synonymously with being an NFT, and everything that is not one of these, they don't call it an NFT. That is obviously not true, but it's just important from a technical, from an ecosystem point of view.
And I think there is a kind of you could say, instead of looking at a technical similarity kind of standard, we could also think of it in terms of structural similarity. Like if they're the same structure, like, or even a black box, if they function the same way, like you could do a trade, it does these things, does not do these things, then you can have not a single definition of NFT, but a kind of a, like a family of concepts that kind of are almost the same, with some overlap, some differences based on. And even in the case like with Namecoin, which is like you cannot do one click and trade, but you can do it, you can do that, whatever. That I'm sure if, like, say Elon Musk, if he starts pumping Namecoin, it will become like the narrative behind it, because he's an ad guy basically, can do such a great thing that because it's difficult, it will become that much more like niche and like crazy high price, because like it's like the entry is so difficult, high bar and everything. So I think just because something is difficult doesn't mean it's less price. In fact, sometimes it becomes more price. That adds to scarcity. Like not the scarcity in terms of number of things, but even less scarcity in terms of the capacity to even use it or trade it. You know what I mean? Like you have to, it's like Mount Everest is so high price, it's so difficult to get on top of that. So because there's a narrative behind it that it's great to go Mount Everest, view is nice or whatever it is. So if you can create a narrative behind it, actually having something difficult is a great thing, because then the price will be incredible. Only the few select can only have a Namecoin. The technical geeks, they know how to install it. I don't know, did I say complete nonsense? I don't know. I guess, right? Like, what the fuck is this? I don't like Elon Musk, just to be.
I think that makes perfect sense. Although I think there is a bit of a distinction here between it having value in the sense that you can actually sell it for a lot of money. It has economic value, versus it just has value as a status symbol, because you can say, look, I was able to do this and not everyone else. But of course, then you could find a bridge between those two, in the sense that maybe at some point there is a marketplace built for Namecoin that is fully accessible and all people can buy it in OpenSea, whatever. Then maybe those names that were like registered very early by those people that were only able to do it then, because they are much scarcer than others, maybe then they will actually be valuable because of that, just because they were early before this barrier of entry got removed, basically.
Yeah, I think Daniel made a very good point about the standards, which is, obviously Ethereum is such a huge thing, within crypto space, of course. Like you said, with OpenSea is almost like the de facto place to go to for trading. I'm sure other places may dispute that, but it's obviously one of the major ones. And why is that? Kind of agreeing with Daniel's point that when you make it easy to integrate with somewhere like OpenSea, then it means everyone can get place, which obviously is a network effect.
We think we got what you said.
I was just adding on the standard aspect. It also allows interoperability, so it means that you can use your NFTs and suddenly you can put it on a loan to get a loan as a collateral. You put as a collateral, for example, or other things that kind of open the utility of the NFT. And I wanted also to comment on the thing that there is more to standard, and one way to see it is that if you can wrap your token, then obviously then you can see that it's compatible in the true sense, I guess. Like we can see a lot of example actually on Ethereum with wrapped like CryptoPunks, for example, which are not ERC721. But yeah, I think that's why standard is important, because then suddenly what happens is that you have this, for example, this NFT fund. This is another interesting aspect between the fungibility and non-fungibility, because suddenly you can put your NFT into something, and then it becomes actually even multiple NFT into one fund, and then you have an ERC20, and so yeah. And they do that for CryptoPunks. So they wrap the CryptoPunk into a ERC721 contract, and then they put that into the fund, and then you have a fund for crypto aliens, alien punks, and etc. etc.
Yeah, it's a very good point. So, I mean, on that, if something doesn't have to follow standards, but can essentially be wrapped afterwards, then you have a much wider, what do I want to say? A much wider
reach.
Not way to define, a way to build NFTs. You have much more freedom, because you could deploy some token onto Ethereum, but it doesn't have to follow any of the standards at all, because you can always wrap it later. So then, a question therefore is how would you know what is an NFT? What would make it that? What makes it that NFT-ness? So it's kind of coming back to the kind of the problem of what makes an NFT. What would be like the distinguishing feature, the marker at a technical level?
I mean,
so
I
like
think it's
having like a token. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For me, I mean, it's the owner field. So there is only one owner. Yeah, I think it's a distinctive feature, and yeah, because everything else can basically by wrapping. You don't need to use a owner of function, can do anything. You just need to have an owner in some way, and then you can wrap it. Even the token URI stuff, it's not necessarily for lands, for example, like it's just X and Y. There's no need. So I think the owner is really the ID, of course, the association between an ID and an owner.
Yeah, exactly. That's also what I would say.
So
that you basically have some asset, something basically that can be owned, and there is like one person or one entity that owns it, and the owner has basically the right to transfer ownership again. Yeah. That's what I would say. I mean, that's basically what would be a token in general, in some sense, or like an asset that has ownership, and ownership is basically the only thing that you, as a concept, that you need for it. And then for it being non-fungible, just means that each token is unique and you cannot split it up and you cannot combine it unless you do these fund things or you do fractionalized ownership, but then it's something else that's just built on top.
What happens if someone else deploys a token with the same ID? Like inside, you have two token contracts where the ID, where someone basically just cloned the ID. There'd be different owners, or there could be different owners, of course.
But
the IDs are the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ID, the hash of the contract, or I mean whatever you present it, because actually in technicality you can have multiple of same ID. It's just that the space is so big that it's probabilistically impossible, and so at the end of the day, the ID is the contract address and the ID. So there is no conflict possible in practice.
Okay. And so this is kind of where technical understanding is a little bit lacking. So if you onto Ethereum, I mean, even if you were to use the same code, but just copy and paste, it's guaranteed a different ID.
Yeah, basically. But actually, to be accurate, yeah, it's. I was thinking in the context of Ethereum, but a token ID is actually a chain ID, like or a chain protocol, a chain ID, then whatever mechanism is in place to have an ID, etc. So there is actually a standard for cross-chain token IDs. I forgot the name and the number, but technically, and of course, then it's up to the mechanism to ensure that nobody can have the same ID on the particular chain or whatever.
I mean, I guess, yeah, I'd be interested to know how that works. I guess another thing is obviously the block at which the ID appears or first appears. So there will be one which is older, which may not matter, but obviously there will be different points in time. So there's still some uniqueness that you're unlikely to have two token contracts with the exact same ID and the exact same block.
And even then, you could have the index within the block, for instance. I think it just boils down to, I mean, whatever you whatever you write on your website or whatever, that is not guaranteed to be unique. That is just a convention or some way to do it. But ultimately, the things will be different because they are on different networks. There are different contracts. One was deployed earlier than the other, whatever. Because I think on a meta level, it's just different things. And if they were not, then it were actually the same token. I mean, technically, like Ronan explained, for instance, on Ethereum, it is just the way that it's built, that it's kind of impossible to get the same if you use the contract address and token ID. And the contract is also, of course, correct and follows the standard in the sense that it is not giving out the same token ID multiple times or something like that. Then it is guaranteed to be unique. And I mean, an interesting thing from the history of Bitcoin here is that actually there was let's say a bug in the original Bitcoin protocol that allowed kind of the same transaction hash to appear multiple times if it was from mining a block. And if you did that, then what it did basically is it would kind of create the same output twice. It would create this kind of the same coins multiple times, which had the effect that it was just one in the end. And it could only be spent once, but that was then it was fixed with an update that required it to be unique. Maybe that's a bit in this direction that you say if you can actually create the same thing twice, then it still exists only once.
And you can always prove who was the first as well, I guess, later.
Yeah, I mean, you can always go out of the system in a sense that if there is something that distinguishes one token from the other, like you said, there are two transactions that create the same token ID in some sense due to a bug or whatever, then you could still always go back to the blockchain and actually say, look, here is the one and here is the other. So they're actually different things. And I created this one and someone else created that one. And even if the normal tools or the wallets built for NFTs in general, or even the contract, don't distinguish that in some sense, they're still different.
Yeah, I had another connection issue there. I don't know why I seem to be plagued with these connection issues. Maybe I need to move country. So, yeah. So I realize we're pushing on here for time, so I don't want to take up too much more time because I know people will be probably busy, or unless you're having a day off with it being Easter. So then the final. I mean, obviously anyone can throw out other points to the conversation. That's all good. But it's more to kind of to bring it full circle, which is to say, okay, where does it make sense to use these within gaming? And of course, in particular, decentralized gaming. Are NFTs fundamentally useful within gaming and within blockchain gaming and within decentralized gaming? I mean, obviously, we kind of know the answer to the question, but let me ask that and just kind of get the conversation going and say, okay, what is your opinion? How do you think it's going to work? Where's the good and where's the bad? Where does it definitely make sense? Where does it maybe make less sense? And what is there a better approach? Is there an approach which makes much more sense, or one that definitely doesn't make sense? Who wants to kick us off?
Go on. No, I was just going to say, so I think with decentralized games, one thing that maybe maybe we're all on the same page there as well, is how the assets are acquired. So with a decentralized game, you can actually acquire those assets and those NFTs in the game through actual gameplay, which can be proved. So it is like a fairer distribution of the assets. But one thing I was thinking about before, and I was going to mention it, was like a token is like a representation of something. But in a decentralized game, if like for example an asset in Torion, for example, it's not actually a representation of the asset. So it's not actually, is it actually a token when you say you have a vehicle in a game or an asset, because it is actually that asset and that is what it has its utility. Whereas like a token is a representation of something. But yeah, that's just something that popped in my head. But yeah, go on. You're going to say something?
Yeah. For me, I mean, ideally everything would be an NFT. Like as a player, it is better. Like if I get something the first, even if it's the exact same utility as another one, I will prefer it an NFT because I can have an history of that item, and then it has more value for it. So I feel, I mean, there is things that obviously are probably not that interesting to get an NFT, and the thing is that NFT have a higher cost of storage. So usually coins, something that user already accept as something fungible, then usually you will not do it. But I can see the benefit in having them non-fungible. And I think there is a way to do it that you can make something start as a fungible that you make non-fungible. But then you don't have the history past that point. So it doesn't, I guess it all depends of, implementation and what matter to the player.
For sure. You said one interesting point there which made me pause, which is NFTs are more expensive. And I was about to say that you're thinking of Ethereum, but actually it's probably true in general that NFTs are going to be more expensive than fungible tokens almost on any platform, right? Just
yeah, it's true. I'm not sure actually. I mean, it's interesting because like Bitcoin with the UTXO are actually a very efficient mechanism for managing this coin, and so I don't know. Maybe it depends, but I feel because you need to associate one owner per copy. I think in principle it feels like it's more expensive, but I might be wrong.
Yeah, it feels like that, but I don't know, maybe Dan was.
Yeah, from a technical point of view, I mean, of course, it is more. It is just more storage and more processing that you need. But what I actually thought you were talking about is not on the technical side, but from the user's point of view, right? Where you say, okay, so there is this game, and they can have a sword or whatever, and it's I don't know, a basic sword, and there are 1,000 of them, or maybe then it's not a basic sword, but I don't know, some better sword. But then it has some utility in the game. Then as a player, I might actually prefer, but it is fungible in the sense that it's just one of these 1,000 legendary swords or whatever. But if you then make it into a non-fungible token, in the sense that each of those 1,000 swords is a different one, then you get also more history to it. That was my understanding of what Ronan was talking about, in the sense that I know, this is the particular of these 1,000 swords that maybe was sold from some other legendary player or whatever. And so this one is actually, for me as a player, I give it more value, even though it's the same utility in the game, than just having a generic one of those.
It's true. So it's funny that we had two different conclusions from the same statement.
I mean, I was doing both statements basically. I was doing that statement and the fact that it's more expensive, like in technical implementation. And so as a developer, you have to make a choice, like a trade-off between what player ultimately like and what you can do efficiently. And then usually what happens is that you find some concept that you can do that. So for example, if you have more than 100,000 of something, then the decision is kind of, okay, let's make them fungible. But then, maybe I will mint 3 very special swords. Then you want them to be unique. so that you have the history on top.
Yeah.
It's kind of a trade-off.
Also, and even there is even one more level to this, I would say, that I just thought about, and that is from the user's point of view or from the usability point of view, right? Because I mean, you see that even with these art NFTs, when you have like 100 copies of some NFT, then there are different models. Like some platforms mint them as fungible ones, like ESE 1155. Some platforms mint like everything as an individual copy, even so you have 100 different NFTs that kind of correspond to the same artwork by the same artist. But then for instance, trading that, or for if I want to buy this and I want to have to find a counterparty, then it's for a user it's much simpler if they are fungible, because I can just say, okay, I want to buy any of these for 1F. Whereas at least with the current marketplaces, you could build like solutions that abstract it and so on. If I want to buy one of these 100 ones and I don't care which it is, but they are separate tokens, then I would have to like talk to each of the 100 owners separately and say, okay, can I buy this token for 1F or this token for 1F?
Yeah, definitely.
And that's, like you said, basically that's probably also something that game design should just take into account. Like, what works best for what this asset actually is.
That's true. Yeah, I think the item history obviously that will make the item unique, as long as you store that. Now, there are some pre-blockchain games, traditional world games, which do allow that in MMOs. So you have something obviously NFT like, it's unique items, but then obviously it's about this, you have to trust the centralized source of truth versus in a decentralized way where everyone can just agree upon the truth because you all have the copy of the database, etc. And there's decentralized rule checking. But it's one of these things, because I know that me and Andy, we've talked about this in the Discord about what makes it valuable in a gaming sense, so not about art. And he says it should have utility, and so it's been a big one for Andy, is it has to have utility to be expensive, right?
It can be a cosmetic item as well. But yeah, I think generally in MMORPGs at least, people will always buy the sword with the most DPS and does the most damage, because that's going to help them get more assets in the game.
I think there's a lot of truth in that, in the sense that if you and you do see that in things like, I think in RuneScape, and I think in Warcraft 2, that if you want to do like the raids at the highest level, the dungeons at the highest level with the rest of your teammates, you do have to have like the best gear to take on the hardest bosses, and you have to pay for that to get this incrementally slightly better gear to then win more gear at a slightly higher level. So of course you are paying for utility. I know at least in RuneScape, for example, they've had these party hats that were dropped, and one red party hat is the same as another red party hat, so they're fungible in that sense, like entirely fungible. But they're also rare. They're limited. They're rare, but they're limited. They have some history in a social sense, and they have no utility, and they're entirely cosmetic. And so it's one of these kind of examples where it slightly breaks the narrative of it has to be an NFT to be expensive, or it has to have unique history of that item to be expensive, because obviously it doesn't, because one individual party hat is almost meaningless. Now, you could say that if a super famous player had a red party hat, like in RuneScape, there has been super famous players, and that particular one could be more expensive than another. Obviously, because they don't track that data, then that history is lost. But I thought it was interesting to challenge the narrative that you have to have unique individual history to be valuable, which it doesn't, and obviously it doesn't even have to have utility. So there's obviously some interesting. I don't want to say trade-off, that's not the right word, but there's obviously different aspects to the value, which could be utility, it could be cosmetic, it could be unique item history, or all of those, or there's some combination.
Yeah, I think in games like that, the cosmetics can be expensive as well, just because the scars. So there might be 4 of them. You're not an NFT. There's not only one. But
yep. It's the rarity.
Like in EverQuest, you could get like a hat or something which there might only 4 exist, and and people do want those, and I think that's a little bit like people buying CryptoPunks a bit, where it is, you know, maybe a little bit like a status symbol as well.
Exactly.
As well as like some players as well just like to look cool in the game, you know, so they want something what's unique and looks cool, like, you know, in some games where you can MMOs where you can do up your house and put pictures on the wall and stuff from inside the game, you know, and some people spend all day doing that, you know, so you go into their house in the game and it's, you know, it like looks amazing, whereas mine is just like wood walls and wood floor, and that's it, you know, with like a box in the middle of the room. So yeah, people like obviously play the games different and have things which are valuable to them more than what they might be to others. So yeah, like just like cosmetic items can have a lot of value.
I guess the one big point you mentioned there, which was kind of implicit in all of this, although we didn't really state it, was the scarcity or the rarity, is almost definitely, you know, it's not quite the deciding factor, but it's obviously such an important factor. You can have something which is super rare, but then not necessarily worth it. I think you also have to have the demand side, which has actually been one of my bugbears with a lot of NFTs, is just making something scarce or limited doesn't make it valuable.
But it has done with like alien punks and crypto.
It has done with CryptoPunks, and that's obviously a good example where there's been huge demand for whatever reason. You know, the market's decided these are rare and they're cool.
Yeah,
they're status symbols, right?
Yeah, they're the originals and the first, so it's just going to be more collectible, aren't they?
It seems to be. I mean, thinking back, you know, coming back to, you know, Decentralized gaming with an example here, that 9 Chronicles, they have NFTs. Each of their items are NFTs, but some items, obviously, I think, like Ronan said, that some swords are basically the same, even though they're really NFTs on chain. They have a unique ID, but at the player level, they're essentially the same sword. They have the same stats. They look the same. There's no way to really know inside the user interface that the swords are the same. They haven't implemented item history yet, although, you know, they've talked about it, and so maybe I think they want to make that come out soon. But it kind of also shows that just because something is really an NFT, at the user level, it could be something else. They could be essentially fungible, right? Yeah, and it's kind of reversing the situation almost.
Yeah, I think like Daniel said as well, it gets complicated. You know, like if there's a marketplace in the game, then, you know, if you're looking for this particular sword because you know, it's the one you can afford and it does a certain amount of damage, then you know, what you're going to do if there's 10,000 of them, you're going to just show a list of all the IDs. You know, you're going to have to stack them together into one, so then you can, you know, buy one or buy two. I guess it makes that interface a bit more complicated to say, you know, I'm looking for a sword that was used by Dave who killed the dragon, or something like that. So there is like, some.
I know in the 9 Chronicles marketplace that they display all the items individually. They don't try to bunch them together. Right. No, each of the sales are individual by separate players, so there could be different prices. Even though 2 swords could be exactly the same, one player might say, "Okay, I'll sell it for 10," and another might sell it for 20.
Yeah.
So it doesn't.
If 2 people sell them, so when you look at the marketplace, do you look at an individual's what he's selling, or does it show all the swords together and then stack
it's a
them
global.
the same price? If there's the same price, does it stack
them? Doesn't stack them. It's just pages and pages. This is one. I mean, this is, you know, one thing where we could say that they could improve their marketplace to make it easier to navigate with better filters.
It would be unique and would be like NFTs then, wouldn't it?
They are. I mean, they are NFTs because they are, you know, on chain, and even in the interface, they are to an extent different. But at the same time, like, there's no visual way to distinguish one from another, other than maybe price on the marketplace. But even that doesn't really mean anything if they're exactly the same.
Maybe the first sword would be something which would have a bit more value.
No, that's true. So one thing they want to work on is actual item history. Which is fine, but I guess it also kind of proves that even if something is an NFT, it's kind of provably so, it doesn't make it valuable, right? Of course, we kind of know that. But then you have the display problem is that if they are really in a gaming sense, they're fungible. ignoring item history, which is fair, even in the back end of their NFTs. And if I think back to even some games like I think in even Star Wars, 20 years ago, the Star Wars Galaxies, you could have items made by certain players, made by Bob or whatever, and they would be NFTs in a sense. I think I don't remember how they displayed it in the marketplace though.
Yeah,
did they stack them or did they do them individually?
Yeah, no. I think EverQuest had the same marketplace. It was made by the same people, weren't it? Sony Online Entertainment, and when you saw the items on the marketplace, it would say made by Bob or something like that, wouldn't it?
Or whatever.
Yeah, and from what I remember on the EverQuest one is if it was made by the same person, then they would be stacked, but otherwise they wouldn't be stacked.
Yeah, I think with Galaxies, I wanted to say that they were stacked, but I have this thing in the back of my head though. I remember there was a decent amount of randomness in the items, such that if you had different materials, etc., and there was some RNG in the background, such that you make two items, you make two blasters, but they could end up being slightly different with slightly different stats because of the RNG. And then I can't remember how they stacked it in the marketplace because they could be different, and so they could have different prices, and maybe they weren't stacked because obviously there was some uniqueness that they had slightly different stats due to RNG, even though they're made by Bob.
Yeah, they wouldn't have been able to stack them then, would they? If they were stats?
Probably not, or they probably shouldn't have done at least. Yeah, that is. So I kind of in my head now. I'm thinking back to one thing you said, Andy. Kind of when we kicked this part off, and that was actually probably the most on-topic reply given what the question was. Oddly, which you said, oh, maybe they're not NFTs or maybe they're not tokens because a token's supposed to be a representation. But in some ways I agree, in some ways I disagree. So I like what you're saying in a sense that you're basically saying there is no difference between the asset and the token, say in Torion, because that's obviously one which you guys know because you're building it. You can't separate the two. I mean, you could come up with some scheme and you could implement future technology to do that, but really, whenever you trade the item inside the game, you're trading token, and because it's fully decentralized. There's everyone has the same understanding, right?
I was thinking more that the definition of a token is like the representation of something. So like an NFT of a picture is a representation of the picture, whereas in a decentralized game, it is basically another reality, and the asset in there is a real thing. It's just that it's in a virtual space. So is it actually a token? Is it a representation of the sword, or is it actually the sword?
I'm kind of this is I would probably still call it a token just because it's easier and it's easier for me to talk about that. But I think the asset is, like you say, the sword is the asset. It is the token. The two are the same thing. They're kind of meaningless without each other, because in a decentralized game, like you say, it's a whole other reality, a whole other. I don't want to say metaverse, but it's another reality where the sword has a meaning within that, and you can't separate the sword from that universe. It only exists in that universe, or it could be a metaverse. But anyway, that's besides the point. Whereas in another game, you could argue, where the link between the token and the art is much more tenuous, then the two can exist quite easily. Beeple's artwork can exist as a JPEG by itself, completely separate from the token. And a lot of, dare I say, and be a bit naughty here, a lot of blockchain games you could separate the two.
Yeah. Well, they are separated for that. I mean, if Beeple's picture was totally stored on the blockchain, if like 400 megabytes, whatever it is, then you would actually be trading the JPEG. But instead, you're actually trading now the representation of it as a token. And that's
it's like a signature.
And that's, I guess, is a little bit similar to if you had an NFT game where the game isn't decentralized and you're just selling the sword as an NFT, like in lots of the NFT games. then is that one? Are you selling you are actually selling the token, because that token represents a sort in this centralized world, whereas in a decentralized game you are, at least with what we're doing, you are actually trading the actual real asset rather than a representation of it.
So in the main sense, that is certainly true, but of course you could then even say, even in a decentralized game, you can have a representation, a token as well.
You could have.
You could have, if you kind of wrap a vehicle in Torion somehow, lock it in the world, and then issue a token on Ethereum.
Yeah.
Then if you trade that NFT, then it would be a token in that sense, right?
Yeah.
It would be represented,
you could
or like an IOU or whatever for this asset in the game.
Yeah, you could create tokens of the decentralized assets as well. But as they are, like for example, how we do it, we're not trading tokens in the way that we have it now. You would actually be just trading the real asset.
Yeah, I would agree there. I mean, of course, it's just a matter of how you define it, how you call it. But I think that makes sense to say it like this.
Yeah, I mean, I will say something a bit different about the JPEG, though, because it's more about the data availability solution that you provide. Because if you have the hash, and for example, you want to make some image processing that tell you the next stage, if you have a game on the Beeple that take the 400 megabyte file and then do a transformation, and you have maybe a children of that token, then the fact that you only store the hash doesn't change that ability, because you could always provide that data, and then the contract will check that the hash match and then do the transformation. So I think you are really still trading the image. The fact that it's a hash, I don't think breaks that rule. It's more about how you make the data available, this is where the issue lies. But if you can solve it in another way, then suddenly the blur, it's very blurry, the line between.
Yeah, there's a good point in there, because that was one of the things I wanted to push Andy on here, was that you were saying, for example, if you put the JPEG onto the chain, right, which would be crazy because it's 400 meg. I don't even think in DSV they would do that, but who knows? But there's obviously, but if people don't know your game, they might be saying, well, how is it possible that your items are, fully decentralized and tradable? And we're kind of now laughing at putting everything on chain. What's the resolution there? I mean, obviously I know the answer, but I think it's kind of one of the things that you haven't said, but you've only alluded to.
Sorry, I didn't get that one.
So I'll give the answer. It's easier. There's a problem of data availability, right? Blockchains provide availability, but they're expensive, super expensive, which is why people's artwork, for example, isn't on the chain. And so for gaming, why bother with full decentralization? What does that really mean? If people's artwork can say be on IPFS, is that not good enough for a game, and not to do what you guys are doing?
Maybe this is similar, but basically, yeah. So in a decentralized game, the assets can change ownership based on this game rules and the game logic and things. Whereas when it's an NFT outside of the game, you can't change ownership based on I killing you and stealing your stuff. Is that the sort of train of
No, it's even simpler than that. So I guess I messed up the way to explain it. So in Torion, the gaming assets, there is a representation on the chain, but the actual art asset, whether it's a JPEG or something else, you've solved the availability problem by making the art assets available to everyone, and everyone has a copy of the art assets on their computer. So if you want to play Torion, you have to download the game. You have to have a copy of all the assets. So this is kind of what I was getting at. Whereas with Beeple's picture, most of us are probably not going to download it because we have no reason to. There's no, other than for fun, like there's no real reason to have his artwork, maybe unless you like it. It doesn't have any greater meaning. There's no greater mechanics around that picture. Whereas a picture in Torion, it has greater meaning because there's greater mechanics around that picture. It's not just a JPEG, it's actually a tank or some sort of flying ship. You know, it has stats, it has rules, which are kind of meta to the image, but the overall kind of picture of a gaming world is that it's not just a JPEG, it actually has some logic, there's actually rules, there's stats. And the sword or the tank is everything together as one. And it's not just on IPFS, it's not just on a centralized server, but every single person has a copy of the JPEG. They have a copy of the rules, the stats, and everyone can agree upon the stats and the images and the relationships. Everyone has to agree upon the relationships and how the items can evolve over time, right? That's like the big difference between, say, Torion and many other games, is that everyone can agree on the rules and the art, which is what makes us.
They don't have to agree on the arts though as well. You know, you could play.
True. That's true.
You could play Torion in a command line like Daniel does. You know.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
and even
that's very true.
Even I mean I don't know how it's implemented, but even the data, the stats of the for me I think it's actually very similar to how the hash is stored. I think because you could also make a game like Torion where the data of the item is actually not in the game or even in the logic, it's outside, but you have the hash stored in the thing, and then the user, whenever you use it, you have to provide the data, which come with its own problem. But what I mean is that it's not technically really different. It's a way to solve data availability, like, and if you solve it in another way, like for example with Filecoin or another incentive mechanism that makes that the hash will be stored, then you go back to a very similar kind of threat protection. Yeah,
I guess there is that. So I'm kind of trying to tease out a little bit of the difference between, say, being a little naughty here, a blockchain game and a decentralized game, because obviously there can be a difference such that you could centralize the game logic and the mechanics, and you could say, hey, but everyone has an NFT, and we can all agree that the NFT is super available. It's on IPFS. It's been replicated 1 million times. It's got a hash on Ethereum. So that is the sword, right? No one can steal that sword. Therefore, everything's dandy. Why bother going fully decentralized?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think I'm on board with that. I think I wanted to clarify I think the distinction is not where the data lies. That's what I wanted to say. I think for me the distinction is the utility, whether it's built in or it's outside. And I think that's where decentralized game compared to other game differ, is that the utility of the asset is built into the logic that everybody run.
Indeed.
But the fact that the data is stored on IPFS or not, I think it's a different subject. Basically, you can have a game where you store the hash, or, as I say, like the hash of all the data of the item. It will be decentralized. The only thing is that the user need to provide the data.
I guess there's some truth in that. Yeah, I mean, so what is the difference? Is obviously is that. So regardless of the availability of, say, the asset, obviously everyone should still agree upon the logic, which people might assume that that's obviously on chain, but we know that there's obviously tricks that you don't have to do it all on chain. What you want doesn't necessarily even need to be a blockchain, but obviously we know that there's reasons for having a blockchain with fault tolerance. But if everyone could magically agree upon the outcome of a battle individually, then obviously that would be decentralized. We know that there will be cheating, which is why you need to have fault tolerance, and you pretty much need to have a blockchain to mediate that. But I guess the big thing is that Andy and me having a fight with swords is that both of us have to agree upon the result, but then so should everyone else who wasn't there to witness us in the fight. We should all have a way to know that what the outcome was, and to calculate that, individually and ideally without, Andy and actually be prevented from cheating. which, there's multiple ways to do it. You could do it without a blockchain, but it's just, I think there's obviously an efficiency gain and a very strong way to prevent cheating in that sense. And so I was kind of trying to tease some of that out of what Andy had said. And I guess Daniel has to go. And I guess probably almost a good time to wrap this up. I don't know if there's any parting comments before we do.
No. Looking forward to the next one.